Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. I wanted to dive in a little deeper to a topic that we discussed briefly yesterday, the World Economic Forum. And this gentleman, I don't know if he's an advisor, he's spoken at their Davos event a few times. I guess he might be an advisor to Klaus or something like that. But he's said some things, and if you take clips of some of the presentations that he's given, which we did yesterday, to be overly fair to the guy, he can be taken out of context. So what I want to do is go into an article that he's written to make sure that we're understanding everything that he's saying, and then maybe try to apply that to what he is advising or how he is maybe influencing the World Economic Forum and Klaus, and then how they would use that to influence politicians, the media, corporations, etc. It's a very interesting kind of Rubik's Cube of human psychology and influence. And I think it's important that we try to understand it to the best of our ability so we can try to figure out the probabilities of certain things happening in the future. And then, what institutions that we need to direct our energy towards as far as pushing back. You can sit there and say, well, the politicians are the ones we need to push. Well, really? Maybe it's the World Economic Forum. And then maybe it's not the World Economic Forum. Maybe it's the IMF. Maybe it's the people that are influencing Klaus. Who knows? But at least I believe we've got to try to think through this stuff so we know where to direct our energy in the most efficient manner to make sure that our kids and our grandkids are growing up in a world where they actually have the same amount, if not more, individual freedom and liberty that we have experienced in our lives. So let's get into this article here and just try to be as fair as possible to Mr. Harari. And I'm going to mention a couple things. I'll just give you my thoughts, and then we'll just kind of see if we can connect some dots here. A couple of my thoughts, I can tell you, really are rather abstract or kind of on a tangent, but every time I read, last night I read a few articles from this gentleman, and I listened to a couple of his interviews, and there's a couple things that seemed odd that struck me, and we'll get into that. But it's kind of off topic, but maybe it's not. I don't know. So he starts off here. On the one hand, I believe that the liberal story is flawed, and he doesn't define liberalism, unfortunately. Because is he talking about classical liberals, or is he talking about today's liberals? Because obviously, today's liberals aren't too liberal. So I think he's talking about classical liberalism, but let's keep going on here. That it does not tell the truth about humanity, and that in order to survive and flourish in the 21st century, we need to go beyond it. So here's where he starts to... This is the shell game that I think he's playing, and I don't know if he's doing it to sell books or... I don't know. And we'll get into it in a moment, but it seems very similar to what the MMT people do. That they're very, obviously very intelligent, but they're not really saying anything new. They're just saying, oh, well, the government can print money. Yeah, okay. But they're just saying it in a different way, so it sounds like revolutionary. But when you get to the heart of what they're saying, it's like, there's nothing new here. It's just the way they say it makes them sound like geniuses. And it's kind of the vibe I get when I read Mr. Harari, but I'll let you guys be the judge. And so, and another thing that I wanted to point out there is he tends to make these absolute statements as though they're just a matter of fact, and I don't really think they are. So, this is a good example. In order to survive and flourish, he says, in the 21st century, we need to go beyond it. So we need to go beyond, I guess, liberalism. And this is where I'd say, no, not really. If we don't go beyond liberalism, you mean we're not going to survive as a species? No, that's hyperbolic to say the least. On the other hand, at present, the liberal story is still fundamental to functioning of the global order. What's more, liberalism is now attacked by religious and nationalist fanatics who believe in nostalgic fantasies that are far more dangerous and harmful. What I find, or one of the things that struck me first when I was reading this article or a couple others he wrote, or any of his interviews, is he seems to have this deep down hatred of religion. And who knows why. Another thing that he does whenever he says really anything is he always mentions that he is gay. He'll say, oh, well, my husband this or that. It's like he always mentions it in areas where you really don't have to mention that. And I contrast this to a gentleman that I like listening to, Dave Rubin. And I've interviewed Dave. He's a great guy. And, Dave's gay, but he doesn't, every video he does, he doesn't mention his husband. And it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's nothing, but it just seems odd. Or, another person who not that it matters, but is straight is Jeff Snyder. And I had the opportunity the other day to meet his wife and his 3 daughters. But you would never know. In fact, how many of you know that Jeff is even married? How many of you even know that he has 3 daughters? Like you don't know that. But how do you know, or do any of you even know his sounds crazy to say it, but his sexual preference or whatever? No, he doesn't. It just never comes up. He's talking about the Eurodollar system. For that to come up in every single conversation, it's just, I don't know. Something just seems off. But I'll keep going. But one thing that you'll notice that he always does is he always goes after religion. And he does it in a way where it seems like there's a lot of anger towards religion. And I kind of juxtapose that to Sam Harris, who is a very well-known atheist, as most of you guys know. But when Sam talks about religion, he doesn't get emotional about it. It's not like he's having a visceral reaction to just the word religion. And it seems like Harari is, and he always just, religion is the root of all evil here. And I don't know, maybe growing up in Israel, maybe it was difficult. Maybe he was, I don't know, maybe there's something there where he's, what he's doing now is really just reacting to kind of, going through a lot of traumatic experiences due to religion and, due to his orientations. I don't know, but this is me spitballing it, but that part just seems odd. So let's keep going here. The next bit that I highlighted is, and I'll read it directly. So we hope liberalism can reinvent itself yet again, but the main challenge it faces today comes not from fascism or communism, and not even from demagogues or autocrats that are spreading everywhere like frogs after the rains. This time, the main challenge emerges from the laboratories. Oh, okay. And I see that the reason I highlighted this is because the main challenges it faces today comes not from fascism or communism. Um, I don't. It's weird that he mentions fascism there or communism because the organization. I don't know that he's a part of the World Economic Forum, but let's just say that he's an advisor. Uh, that they're straight fascists, not from a standpoint of being nationalistic or racist, but economic fascism, where they want this partnership between the private sector and the public sector. That's just a fancy way of saying economic fascism. I mean, and they're all Marxists. They're all central planners. So I think it's interesting that he brings up these groups as though they are, they're groups that we should look out for, and they're groups that have had negative connotations in the past, yet the group that he may be a part of or has associated with, it just blatantly comes out and says that they see things in a very similar way, although they spin it with some 2022 marketing. So here's where he gets straight into what I think is kind of a hyperbolic statement that he's making just to kind of get everyone's attention. Again, it seems very similar to the MMT folks, how they say that, they'll just come out and say, the government is a currency issuer, not a currency user. Therefore, we never have to worry about the debt. The government can just print money. The government is the currency issuer. Therefore, worrying about debt or even selling bonds is just utter nonsense. See, that sounds like a very radical statement. And until you actually just think through it, and you're like, no, there's nothing radical about that. That's like everyone knows that. It's just the way they say it sounds radical. So let's move on here. He goes on, now I'm reading from the article. Unfortunately, free will isn't a scientific reality. It is a myth inherited from Christian theology. Again, he goes back to, he's always really, really harsh on religion. And it's like he throws religion under the bus whenever he gets the opportunity. Just an observation. Theologians developed the idea of free will to explain why God is right to punish sinners for their bad choices and reward saints for their good choices. Again, I try to imagine what it would be like to live or grow up in Israel when you're surrounded by Orthodox Jews. I've never been to Israel's, but I would assume that you're surrounded by a lot of Orthodox Jews that might have a different opinion of being gay than we have here in the United States, and how that is growing up, how that may shape your view of of religion. But I digress. Okay. So I'll just read this again here. Theologians developed the idea of free will to explain why God is right to punish sinners for their bad choices and reward saints for their good choices. So again, let's just assume for a moment that he feels guilty about kind of who he is as a result of his environment, and that he associates free will with the guilt. And if there is free will, then he should feel guilty about who he is, and therefore he needs to make sure that free will does not exist. Because if free will doesn't exist, nor does his guilt. again, I'm spitballing here. I know I'm going way off on a tangent, but this was my impression as I was, whenever I watch a video and read something, this is the vibe I'm getting. I could be completely wrong. So he goes on to say, if our choices aren't made freely, why should God punish or reward us for them? According to the theologians, it is reasonable for God to do so because our choices reflect the free will of our eternal souls, which are dependent of all physical and biological constraints. The myth has little to do with the science. I love that word now. That now teaches us about Homo sapiens and other animals. Humans certainly have a will, but it isn't free. And here I think he's playing with words. And I'll explain further as we read on. You cannot decide what desires you have. You can't decide to be introvert, extrovert, easygoing, or anxious, gay or straight. And he always has to mention that. It's just weird. Humans make choices, but they are never independent choices. Every choice depends a lot on biological, social, personal conditions that you cannot determine for yourself. I can choose what to eat, whom to marry, whom to vote for, but these choices are determined in part by my genes, my biochemistry, my gender, my family, background, my national culture, etc. I didn't choose which genes or which family to have. Right. So it's just, I think if he were to come out and say that who you are as a person has a lot to do with your parents, your genes, but it has a lot to do with the environment in which you grew up in. So there's external and internal factors that go into who you are as a person. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But the way he says it is that, well, therefore you don't have free will. It's like, wait a minute here. It is true that I might not have complete control over things that may be subconscious, right? Such as, am I an introvert? Am I an extrovert? Am I easygoing or anxious? But to say that you have no control over the conscious part of that is completely ridiculous. I mean, let's just, what he wants to go to directly is you have no control over whether you're gay or straight. That would probably be the most controversial. And okay, well, that may be genetics, that may be something that you don't have control over, but whether you act upon that, then you have complete control over that. So this is, now I'm not saying that don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that people should control that. I'm saying they could if they wanted to. I mean, let's just look at nuns, for heaven's sakes, right? I don't know any nuns, but from what I understand, they are celibate, or priests, I guess, maybe Catholic priests, something like that. They're celibate. So they choose to do that. Now, do they have the hard wiring in there like all of us do, to where they have a desire to procreate? Well, of course. So does that mean that they don't have freedom of choice? Absolutely not. So it's just, you see what he's doing here. It's the same thing that the MMT people do. He says, this is not an abstract theory. You can witness this easily. Just observe the next thought that pops up in your mind. Where did it come from? Did you freely choose to think it? Obviously not. What do you mean, obviously not? You might not be able to choose the exact thoughts, but you can choose what to think about. If I'm sitting here doing a whiteboard video, you can see it in the back there. Am I making a conscious thought to think through the whiteboard video? Of course, of course. You think I'm standing in front of a whiteboard video and I just can't control what I'm doing, and I'm like, I'm trying to do a whiteboard video, but I can't because I have all these thoughts come into my mind that I can't even control. What are you talking about? This is this is ridiculous. He says, but if you carefully observe your own mind, you can realize that you have little control over what's going on in there. Okay. And you know what's interesting though, or another thing that's interesting, I should say, is I've noticed when he goes in front of the media, they just pour over him. They just lap it up, and they just say he's the greatest, and you're amazing, and you're so smart, and they just, oh my gosh, you can do this, and he just walks on water, you know. And it's just whenever the mainstream media has a view of someone like that, I always get suspicious. Not saying that my suspicion is accurate, but it makes me skeptical. You know, they put him up there with Fauci and with everyone else. I'm skeptical there, but let's keep going here. So he continues, though free will was always a myth, in previous centuries, it was a helpful one. It emboldened people who had to fight against the Inquisition, the defined rights of kings, the KGB, the KKK. The myth also carried few costs. In 1776 or 1945, there was relatively little harm in believing that your feelings and choices were the product of some free will rather than the result of biochemistry and neurology. And see, here is where I think someone like a Jordan Peterson or a Brett Weinstein, I would love to see them in a debate here, because, and this is one of the reasons I'm a free speech absolutist, if that's a word, because I think that anything that I disagree with, I want that out in the open so other people can kind of poke holes in it, just like I want my ideas out in the open so other people can kind of poke holes in it and I can sharpen my own ideas. And where I get very nervous when I hear stuff like this is it instantly reminds me of eugenics. More specifically, I think it's biological determinism. And this is what they believed, that just 100% of what made you was genetics, to the point where even if you committed a crime, that was not your own free will, as Mr. Harari would maybe argue or suggest, but this was just a result of your genetics. You just have bad genes, therefore you're compelled. You can't control yourself. You have to steal, or you have to physically abuse people. You don't have a choice. You don't have free will. And you see, that's where I think what he's suggesting here, even if it's just in the way he's wording it, is very, very dangerous. And I think people that are a lot smarter than I am, I would like to see them push back on this and maybe have a very respectful, fascinating debate with Mr. Harari. But, you know, then when I was thinking that last night, I thought, well, why doesn't the World Economic Forum host these types of debates? Like, I think about Free to Choose. Remember the series from Milton Friedman that really had a massive impact on my life? And remember, that's what he did. He would present a little video for a half hour, 45 minutes, and then there would be a debate between him and people who completely disagreed with him. And they would sit there and try to poke holes in his theory, and then they would have a debate going back and forth. I believe it was in the library of the University of Chicago. Why isn't the World Economic Forum doing that? Like, if Harari is such a genius, and if he's so brilliant, great. Why not have a debate with someone who maybe disagrees with him about free will? And let us all hear it. Let the public hear it, and then make up our own minds. But you see, maybe that's not what they want, because it's not that they believe we don't have free will. It's that they don't want us to have free will. Maybe that's where this whole path leads, but let's keep going here with the article. So going back to what Mr. Harari was saying, but now the belief in free will suddenly becomes dangerous, he says. If governments and corporations succeed in hacking the human animal, the easiest people to manipulate will be those who believe in free will. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't buy that. I don't think that you're susceptible. And again, let's think about what he's saying. He's not really saying that you don't have free will. This is hyperbolic. I think this is spin. What he's saying is that governments can easily manipulate you. The media can easily manipulate you. Corporations can easily manipulate you through advertising. Would anyone disagree with that? Like, of course. Show me one adult in the United States today that doesn't realize governments, media, and corporation can and are trying to manipulate you. Is there anyone that believes that Facebook and social media and the algorithms they use on Twitter aren't designed to manipulate you and to keep you on that platform as long as possible? I mean, who are you trying? Of course. Like, who doesn't know that? And yet he's trying to make that statement as though it's some sort of epiphany. Then he goes on to say, in order to successfully hack humans, you need two things: a good understanding of biology and a lot of computing power. No, not really. The other thing you need, Mr. Harari, is for people to choose to allow the government to manipulate them. So as an example here, he talks about implanting things underneath your skin, and not in this article, but I've heard him say that before. Or even, the watch that you use. He talked about that with Anderson Cooper. The watch, not like a normal watch like mine, but like, the one that measures your heart rate and your vital signs and whatnot. And he uses that as an example of how the corporations or potentially governments can hack into that data that your body is producing, your mind, your thoughts, your dreams, and they can use that to manipulate you. Okay, I've got a solution for that, Mr. Hari. Take off the damn watch. So if you're saying that the government is going to force us to wear a watch, well, okay, I agree, but that has nothing to do with free will. That's the opposite of free will, right? So let's just say that a good example would be my Twitter thing. I know that Twitter manipulates me to spend more time on Twitter. I know that for a fact. And I can even, when I'm on Twitter, sometimes you see a notification or something like that. You're like, oh, well, you need to see that notification. I know that Twitter is playing with my mind. I get it. Now, does that mean that I don't have free will? No, absolutely not. Because you know what I can do? And what I do is I go into my settings and I turn off notifications. And I give Twitter the middle finger. Why? Because I have free will. Now, is that a result of my genetics? Is that a result of all the things that have happened to me in my life before that I turned off the notifications on Twitter? No. I know that human beings have that tendency, and that they're messing with your dopamine and whatnot. And so I just choose to turn it off. Therefore, I'm not being manipulated, and I only go on during certain times a day. And then because I have self-control. I think that's really what it boils down to. This implies that people have no self-control whatsoever. And again, I think that's dangerous if you take it to its logical conclusion. But I wanted to point out there why I highlighted this again is because he says the only thing that governments need to hack you is understanding of biology and computer. No, they don't. No, they don't. They have to either force you to wear something to where they can hack you, or they have to force you to spend time on the internet, or you have to choose to do that. But again, you have the choice. And another thing that I think is interesting is this entity, or let's say the World Economic Forum, that he advises or whatever he does with Klaus and the cronies there. He says if governments and corporations succeed in hacking the human animal, and he points out that, okay, this could be a bad thing. Okay, well, what does the World Economic Forum do? They try to influence governments and corporations, hence the public-private partnership, right? So I don't know why he's not including the World Economic Forum in there and saying, if he's saying if governments and corporations, how about including the global elite? So if governments, corporations, or the global elite, like my friends at the World Economic Forum, succeed in hacking the human animal, why is he leaving out one of the main influences based on their own words? You know, Klaus comes out and brags about how Putin and Merkel were in their young leader program, and now he's just so proud of their up-and-coming star, Justin Trudeau. So he comes out and brags about how they have so much influence. So again, if we're looking at the governments and the corporations, shouldn't you include the people that are influencing the governments and corporations to a great degree? I find it a little disingenuous, I guess is the right word, that he left that out. But I'm not surprised. So here he goes on to say, it starts with simple things. As you surf the internet, so he's giving an example of why you don't have free will that, again, makes no sense to me. It starts with simple things. As you surf the internet, a headline catches your eye. Immigrant gang rapes local woman. You click on it. At exactly the same moment, your neighbor is surfing the internet too, and a different headline catches her eye. Trump prepares nuclear strike on Iran. She clicks on it. Both headlines are fake news stories, generated perhaps by Russian trolls. I could go off on another tangent there, but I won't. Or by a website keen on increasing traffic to boost its ad revenues. Both you and your neighbor, or let's also point out, or it could be the U.S. government trying to manipulate you through propaganda. Both you and your neighbor feel that you clicked on these headlines out of your own free will, but in fact you have been hacked. Again, who thinks this? Like who believes that the websites, the headlines, the media, even a newspaper, for heaven's sakes, isn't trying to manipulate you to read the paper? I mean, this isn't anything new. I mean, you go back, I don't know how long newspapers have been around, hundreds of years. I guess that would be with the advent of the printing press. But, even people that wrote books, even artists, would try to grab your attention based on how human beings were hardwired. So are they manipulating you? I mean, to a certain degree. Does that mean that you have been hacked? No, not at all. But again, maybe this isn't a warning, and maybe it's more of a prediction. I'll let you be the judge there. Okay, so I didn't highlight any more because I knew those highlights would make this video extremely long with 34 minutes. So I'd highly suggest reading the whole thing and come to your own conclusions. Just giving you, it's on The Guardian. If you just Google this gentleman's name, Harari, free will, this will come up. Guardian. This is from 2018. And I think he's got a couple speeches on YouTube where he discusses this as well. So I just wanted to go over that just because this is someone who seems to be influencing the World Economic Forum to a great degree. And like I said at the beginning of the live stream, I don't want to throw this guy under the bus, and I don't want to take things that he said out of context, but I do want to try to analyze what he's saying, just try to figure out how this is influencing potentially the global elite and how they may use that to influence politicians, corporations, and maybe achieve their objectives of central planning. Because one thing we know, I don't know definitively how he fits into the puzzle, or if he's even an influence. Maybe he's not even an influence on them. I don't know that definitively. But one thing I do know definitively is that the global elite are central planners, and they want to control the global economy, and I believe they want to control global society. I don't think that's debatable. So looking at everything on the exterior or the periphery through that lens, I think will help us better understand, how not only their objectives, but how they're going to try to achieve those objectives. So again, we can focus our energy efficiently on pushing back to make sure that we maintain the level of freedom and liberty we currently have, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. As always, make sure that you're standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism, and make sure that you're always thinking and always trying to look at other people's views and try to take things in context. And I guess that's my best advice for the afternoon. We'll see you on the next video.